Chapter 1. The Frosted Canvas. The frost-laden countryside of Devonshire gleamed under a pale winter sun as Inspector Price's carriage made its way to the Winterley estate. The sprawling manor, adorned with ivy and icicles, was a picture of serene grandeur. But the air of festivity promised by the wreaths and twinkling lights was overshadowed by the urgent summons that had brought him here. It was Lord Winterley himself who had written the note, imploring Scotland Yard's best to investigate a crime that had shocked not only his household, but all who had heard of it. The Christmas Miracle, a celebrated masterpiece by the late artist Julian Carlyle, had vanished from the estate's private gallery during the annual Christmas ball. As Price disembarked from the carriage, he was greeted by Mr. Branson, the estate's butler, a tall man with a stiff posture and a wary expression. "Inspector, thank you for coming so promptly," Branson said, his breath visible in the chill air. "Lord Winterley is awaiting you in the study. This way, please." The study was a room of old wood and leather, warmed by a roaring fire. Lord Winterley, a man in his late 60s, with a hawkish nose and silver hair, stood by the hearth, a glass of brandy in hand. He turned sharply at Price's entrance. "Inspector Price, welcome. This is an intolerable situation. A theft in my own home, during a celebration no less." His voice trembled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Lord Winterley," Price said evenly, removing his gloves and tucking them into his coat, "I'll need a full account of the events and access to the gallery immediately." Lord Winterley nodded and began recounting the night. The Christmas ball had been a grand affair, attended by members of the local gentry, business associates, and close family. The painting had been the centerpiece of the gallery, displayed in its usual place behind a velvet rope, under a glass case secured by a custom lock. "It wasn't until the early hours of the morning," Winterley continued, "when my son Arthur took some guests to view the painting, that we realized it was gone. The glass case had been opened, and the frame left empty." Price listened intently, taking mental notes. "Who else has access to the gallery?" "Myself, Arthur, and Branson," Winterley replied. "The key is kept in my private study." He gestured to a drawer in the large oak desk nearby. "Or at least it should have been. When we discovered the theft, the key was missing." Price moved closer to the desk. The drawer was ajar, its contents disturbed. "Has anyone handled this since last night?" "No one but myself," Winterley said firmly. "I locked the gallery myself before the ball began and placed the key here. I even checked it before retiring." The inspector's eyes narrowed. Then the thief would need to have taken the key during the ball and returned it unnoticed. An audacious move. Who was in the study last night? Lord Winterley hesitated before responding. "Quite a few people. It was a gathering, after all, but only family and a few trusted guests." Price frowned. "Define trusted." Before Winterley could respond, Branson reappeared. "Inspector, I have taken the liberty of informing the family and staff of your arrival. They await your questioning at your convenience." "Thank you, Branson," Price said. "I'd like to inspect the gallery first." The gallery was a grand room at the far end of the manor, its walls adorned with priceless works of art collected over generations. Price immediately noted the velvet rope and empty frame where the Christmas Miracle had once hung. The glass case, though carefully cleaned, showed faint traces of smudges near the edges. Price knelt to inspect the lock mechanism. It showed no signs of forced entry. "It's an intricate lock," Winterley said, standing a few paces behind. "One of a kind, crafted by a master locksmith in London." "One of a kind," Price repeated thoughtfully. "That narrows things down. Did you notice anything unusual during the ball? Any guests acting suspiciously?" Winterley hesitated. "I did overhear a heated exchange between my cousin Eleanor and Patrick Rains, an art dealer. But Eleanor is family, and Patrick has always been a guest at our gatherings. I can't imagine either of them committing such a brazen act." "Imagination rarely aids an investigation," Price said, rising to his feet. I'll need to speak with them both, as well as Clara Templeton. Winterly's brow furrowed. Clara? The maid? Surely you can't think— Price raised a hand to silence him. I make no assumptions, Lord Winterly. For now, everyone is both innocent and guilty until proven otherwise. By the time Price returned to the study, the suspects had gathered. Lady Eleanor, a woman of elegant but faded beauty, sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly. Patrick Rains, a dashing man in his 30s with a roguish smile, leaned against a bookcase, exuding a practiced air of confidence. Clara Templeton, pale and timid, stood near the door, her gaze fixed on the floor. Price surveyed them, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Good evening, he said, his voice calm but commanding. I'm Inspector Price of Scotland Yard. I'll be conducting interviews to determine who among you had the opportunity and motive to steal the Christmas miracle. I trust you'll cooperate fully. The suspects exchanged uneasy glances as Price took his seat by the desk, his notebook and pen at the ready. It was clear to all that the frost in the air had little to do with the weather outside. Chapter 2: A Web of Secrets. The clock on the mantel chimed 10 as Inspector Price prepared to conduct his first round of interviews. The study, dimly lit by the flickering fire, cast long shadows on the walls, amplifying the tension in the room. The suspects sat apart, each exuding an air of discomfort. Lady Eleanor, Price said, motioning toward the chair opposite him. She rose, smoothing her skirts, and took her place. Eleanor Winterly was a woman in her 50s, her beauty softened by age but her bearing regal. Her dark eyes held a flicker of defiance as she met Price's gaze. I trust this won't take long, Inspector, she said. Price ignored the remark, flipping open his notebook. Lady Eleanor, you were seen having a heated discussion with Mr. Rains during the ball. What was it about? She stiffened. It was a private matter, Inspector. Private or not, it may be relevant to this investigation, Price said firmly. I urge you to cooperate. Eleanor sighed, her resolve wavering. Patrick, Mr. Rains, has been pestering me about selling a painting I own. It's a family piece, and I refused. He didn't take it well. And this conversation took place during the ball? Yes, near the conservatory. But I assure you, it was a trivial matter. Price made a note. And where were you between midnight and 1 in the morning? I was in the drawing room with several guests. Lady Fairchild and Mr. Dunbar can vouch for me. Price studied her for a moment before nodding. That will be all for now. Eleanor rose, her expression unreadable, and returned to her seat by the fire. Mr. Rains, Price called. The art dealer stepped forward, his smile confident but not reaching his eyes. He took the seat with a practiced ease that spoke of charm honed over years of negotiation. Inspector, I'll save you the trouble. I had nothing to do with the theft, Rains said, leaning back in the chair. Price arched an eyebrow. I'll be the judge of that. Lady Eleanor claims you argued with her about a painting. Care to elaborate? Rains chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. It's true. I've been interested in acquiring a particular piece from her collection for some time, but Eleanor is stubborn. Were you near the gallery at any point during the ball? No, I was in the ballroom most of the evening, Rains said. If you ask around, you'll find plenty of witnesses. And after the ball? Rains hesitated, his charm faltering. I stepped outside for some air, alone. I needed to clear my head after that argument. Price tapped his pen against the notebook. So, no alibi for the time of the theft? Rains's smile tightened. It seems not, but I assure you, Inspector, I've no reason to steal that painting. It would be impossible to sell something so well known. Unless the buyer has no intention of displaying it publicly, Price said evenly. Rains flinched but said nothing more. That will be all, Price said. Rains returned to his spot, his easy demeanor noticeably cracked. Miss Templeton, Price said, his tone softer. Clara Templeton approached hesitantly, her hands clutching her apron. She was young, no more than 20, with wide, fearful eyes. Miss Templeton, Price began, You've been employed here for how long? 2 years, sir, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. And your duties include? Cleaning, mostly. I help with the gallery sometimes, dusting the frames and cases. Price leaned forward. So you would be familiar with the lock on the glass case holding the Christmas Miracle? Clara paled. Yes, sir, but I'd never touch it without permission. Calm yourself, Price said soothingly. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual last night? Clara hesitated, glancing toward Lord Winterly, who sat silently in the corner. I saw someone near the study door after dinner, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Who was it? She wrung her hands. It was Lady Eleanor. She looked like she was searching for something. Eleanor bristled but said nothing. And where were you between midnight and 1? Price continued. In the servants' quarters, Clara said. I wasn't feeling well, so I went to bed early. Mrs. Hargrove can confirm it. Price nodded. One last question. Have you ever been approached by anyone asking about the painting or the estate's security? Clara's eyes widened in alarm. No, sir, never. Very well, Price said, leaning back. Clara rose, her hands trembling, and returned to her place. Price closed his notebook and addressed the room. I have enough for now, but rest assured, this is far from over. No one is to leave the estate until my investigation is complete. The suspects exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the inspector's scrutiny hanging heavily in the air. As Price exited the study, he replayed the interviews in his mind. Lady Eleanor's evasiveness, Raines's lack of an alibi, Clara's fear, each had something to hide. The web of secrets was beginning to reveal itself, but the threads were still tangled. Standing in the cold corridor, Price gazed out at the frost-covered grounds. Somewhere within these walls lay the truth, and he would unravel it piece by piece. Chapter 3. The Missing Key. The morning dawned crisp and cold, the frost on the estate's windows glittering like diamonds in the sunlight. Inspector Price had risen early, determined to uncover the first thread that would unravel the mystery. After a brief breakfast in the servants' hall, he returned to the study to examine the drawer where the gallery key had been kept. Lord Winterly stood nearby, his expression troubled. The drawer is rarely unlocked, Inspector. It's always been a secure place for the key. Rarely unlocked, but not immune to tampering, Price replied. He knelt beside the desk, carefully inspecting the drawer and its lock. The wood around the keyhole bore faint scratches. This suggests it was opened with a tool rather than a key. Winterly frowned. You're saying someone picked the lock? Likely so, Price said. And that would require knowledge of its location and mechanism. How many people knew the gallery key was kept here? My family and Branson, of course. Perhaps a few long-standing members of the staff, Winterly admitted reluctantly. Price nodded. I'll need a list of those individuals. The inspector's next stop was the gallery, where he planned to retrace the thief's steps. The room, still roped off from the rest of the estate, felt like a shrine to the missing masterpiece. Price stood before the empty frame, his eyes scanning the walls and floor. He crouched to examine the lock on the glass case. Unlike the drawer in the study, it bore no signs of tampering. The mechanism was intricate, with a keyhole too small for an ordinary tool. Price's lips tightened. This wasn't an opportunistic theft. It was planned. He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Branson entered, holding a folded piece of parchment. I found this while tidying the ballroom this morning, sir, Branson said, handing it over. It seems out of place. Price unfolded the note, his eyes narrowing as he read, Meet me by the conservatory after dinner. We have much to discuss. The handwriting was precise and feminine. Interesting, Price murmured. Do you recognize this handwriting? Branson hesitated. It might be Lady Eleanor's, but I can't be certain. Price slipped the note into his coat pocket. Thank you, Branson. Keep this between us for now. Back in the study, Price reviewed the list Lord Winterly had provided. 5 names stood out: Lady Eleanor, Mr. Raines, Clara Templeton, Branson, and Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper. Each had access to the study or plausible knowledge of the gallery's security. Price decided to begin with Mrs. Hargrove. He found her in the kitchens, supervising the preparation of lunch. She was a stout woman in her 60s, her sharp eyes betraying years of experience managing the household. "Inspector," she said briskly, "what can I do for you?" "Mrs. Hargrove, I need to know about the study. Who has access to the room when Lord Winterly isn't present?" "Only Branson and myself, sir," she replied. "We're responsible for keeping it tidy." "And during the ball, was anyone in the study who shouldn't have been?" Her expression hardened. "I saw Lady Eleanor enter the study briefly, though she left quickly enough. I didn't think much of it at the time, but she seemed flustered." "Flustered?" Mrs. Hargrove nodded. "Yes, sir, like she was searching for something." Price's mind turned to the note he had found. Was it possible Lady Eleanor had arranged a clandestine meeting, only to lose her nerve, or her objective? By mid-afternoon, Price sought out Lady Eleanor again. He found her in the solarium, gazing out at the frost-covered garden. "Inspector," she said, her tone wary, "have you more questions for me?" "Indeed," Price said, producing the note. "Do you recognize this?" Eleanor's eyes widened ever so slightly before she masked her reaction. "No, I do not. Where did you find it?" "In the ballroom," Price replied, watching her closely. "It appears to be arranging a meeting by the conservatory. A rather curious place for a conversation, wouldn't you agree?" Eleanor turned away, feigning disinterest. "I wouldn't know, Inspector. The ball was a crowded affair. Any number of people could have dropped that note." "Perhaps," Price said, tucking the note away, "but I find it interesting that multiple witnesses place you near both the study and the conservatory that evening. Care to explain?" Her hands tightened on the edge of her shawl. "I was looking for Patrick. After our argument, I thought it best to reconcile before things became too public." "And did you?" She hesitated. "No, I couldn't find him." Price filed her response away. She was hiding something, but whether it pertained to the theft remained unclear. As night fell, Price gathered all three suspects, Lady Eleanor, Mr. Raines, and Clara, in the study. He placed the note on the desk between them. "This was found in the ballroom," Price began. "It suggests a meeting by the conservatory. I want to know who wrote it." The three suspects exchanged uneasy glances. Clara was the first to speak. "It wasn't me, sir. I don't write so fancy." Eleanor said nothing, her gaze fixed on the fire. "I assure you, Inspector, I had no reason to write such a note," Raines said, his confidence returning. Price studied them for a long moment before speaking again. "Let me be clear. This investigation will uncover the truth, whether you help me or not. The painting's theft required careful planning, knowledge of the estate, and a precise window of opportunity. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying." The tension in the study was palpable as Price's words hung in the air. Each suspect bore the weight of suspicion, their secrets threatening to unravel. Satisfied he had planted seeds of doubt, Price dismissed them. As they filed out, he turned back to the fire, his mind already working through the puzzle. The thief had made one mistake, the key, and it would be their undoing. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Conservatory. Inspector Price stood at the window of his temporary quarters in the Winterly estate, sipping a lukewarm cup of tea. Outside, the frost-covered grounds glittered under the pale light of dawn. The estate's sprawling garden and conservatory loomed in the distance, their skeletal outlines stark against the wintry haze. The note found in the ballroom lingered in his thoughts. It was no random scrap. It was the first tangible clue connecting the suspects to the night of the theft. The meeting it referenced, by the conservatory, had likely been pivotal to the crime, or its aftermath. Price finished his tea, donned his coat and hat, and made his way outside. The conservatory, a grand structure of glass and wrought iron, was filled with dormant plants and shrubs wrapped for the winter. The door creaked as the inspector pushed it open, and the faint smell of damp earth greeted him. The interior was dim. The inspector's boots crunched against the gravel floor as he began a methodical search. Near the eastern corner of the conservatory, where the glass walls met the garden, Price paused. The gravel here was uneven, as if someone had disturbed it. Kneeling, he examined the ground closely. A faint depression, like the mark of a shoe, caught his eye. It led toward the door. Price stood and traced the prints, careful not to obscure them further. The trail ended abruptly at the conservatory's entrance, suggesting whoever had been here returned the way they came. "Curious," Price muttered, stepping back inside. Returning to the study, Price summoned Lord Winterly. "Inspector, any progress?" he asked, sinking into a chair. "Perhaps," Price said, sitting opposite him. "Tell me about the conservatory. Is it commonly used?" "Not during the winter," Winterly replied. "In spring and summer, Eleanor spends time there with her plants, but now it's mostly neglected. The staff might venture in occasionally, but not often." "Is it locked at night?" Winterly frowned. "No. I suppose we never saw the need. Why do you ask?" "I found evidence of someone lingering near the conservatory door on the night of the theft," Price said, "and I believe it ties into the note discovered in the ballroom." Winterly looked troubled. "You think the meeting mentioned in the note actually took place?" "I do," Price replied, "and it's possible the thief used the conservatory as a meeting place." Winterly rubbed his temples. "This is more complex than I imagined, Inspector. Whatever you need from me, consider it done." "I'll need to speak to Branson," Price said. "He seems to know the comings and goings of this estate better than most." Branson arrived promptly, his posture stiff with unease. Price wasted no time. "Branson, how often do you or the other staff visit the conservatory?" "Rarely, sir," Branson said. "Perhaps once a week to check for leaks or pests, but otherwise it's left alone in winter." "And on the night of the ball?" Branson hesitated. "I didn't go near it myself, sir, but I saw Miss Templeton heading in that direction before dinner." Price raised an eyebrow. "Clara Templeton? Did she say why?" "No, sir," Branson admitted, but she looked nervous, clutching her apron as if she was hiding something. Price tapped his pen against his notebook. "And after dinner? Did anyone else approach the conservatory?" Branson's brow furrowed in thought. "Not that I recall, sir, but the guests were milling about, and it was hard to keep track of everyone." "Very well," Price said. "That will be all for now." Later that afternoon, Price confronted Clara in the servants' quarters. She was folding linens, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Templeton," Price began, "why did you visit the conservatory before dinner on the night of the ball?" Clara's eyes widened, and she clutched the sheet in her hands. I was sent to check on the heating pipes, sir. Mrs. Hargrove said she'd heard strange noises and thought something might be amiss." "And did you find anything?" "No, sir. Everything seemed normal." Price studied her. "Did you see anyone else near the conservatory?" Clara hesitated, biting her lip. I thought I saw Lady Eleanor walking toward the garden, but I can't be sure. It was getting dark." "Lady Eleanor again," Price thought to himself. "You seem to have an excellent memory for her movements, Clara." "Why is that?" Clara flushed. "It's not like that, sir. I only noticed because she seemed upset. I didn't mean any harm." Price nodded slowly. "I believe you. But if there's anything else you recall, no matter how insignificant it seems, you must tell me." As the day wore on, Price pieced together the fragments of information he had gathered. Lady Eleanor, Mr. Raines, and Clara all had reasons to be near the conservatory, but none had provided a satisfactory explanation. By evening, Price returned to the gallery. The empty frame loomed over him, a stark reminder of the stakes. He examined the floor beneath it once more, his eyes catching something he had missed earlier, a faint smear of what looked like candle wax near the base of the frame. Price crouched to inspect it. The wax was dark red, and it trailed toward the door. He followed the trail down the corridor, stopping when it disappeared near the conservatory's entrance. The wax suggested someone had used a candle for light, perhaps to navigate the gallery or signal an accomplice. It was a small clue, but a promising one. Standing alone in the quiet corridor, Price vowed to uncover the truth. Somewhere among the suspects lay the answer. Chapter 5. The Red Wax Trail. The discovery of the red wax had breathed new life into Inspector Price's investigation. It was evidence of the thief's presence, and, perhaps more intriguingly, a clue pointing toward their methods. After ensuring the wax trail was undisturbed, Price summoned Lord Winterly to the gallery. The Baron arrived promptly, bundled in a heavy coat and a haggard look. "Lord Winterly," Price began, gesturing to the smear of wax on the floor, "do you recall any candles being used during the ball? Specifically, ones with red wax?" Winterly frowned. "We rarely use candles for lighting anymore. Most of the house is outfitted with gas lamps. But—" He paused, his expression thoughtful. "But what?" "The gallery," Winterly said slowly. "There are decorative candelabras along the walls, but they're purely ornamental. They hold red candles, though I can't imagine why anyone would light them." Price's interest piqued. "When was the last time you saw those candles lit?" "Years ago, I should think," Winterly replied. "They're part of the estate's ambience, not its practical lighting." "Then it seems someone had a specific reason to use one during the ball," Price said. "I'll need to examine those candelabras." The gallery's candelabras were works of art themselves, their intricate brass stems curling into the shapes of vines and leaves. Each held a half-burned red candle, untouched by time or use, except for one. Price's sharp eyes fell on a single candle with a faint blackened wick. He lifted it carefully, noting the melted wax pooled unevenly at its base. "This candle was lit recently," he said aloud. Winterly, standing nearby, looked troubled. "You think the thief used it to illuminate their way?" "Perhaps," Price replied, "or as a signal. Either way, it narrows our timeline further." He set the candle aside and began a meticulous search of the gallery for more wax strips. A faint trail led toward the corridor, but stopped abruptly at the door. Price's next task was to question the staff about the candles. He found Mrs. Hargrove in the kitchen, instructing a footman on polishing silver. "Mrs. Hargrove," Price began, "who is responsible for maintaining the candelabras in the gallery?" "That would be Branson, sir," she said without hesitation. "He polishes them and replaces the candles as needed." "And do you know if any candles were lit during the ball?" Mrs. Hargrove's brow furrowed. "Not that I'm aware of, Inspector. Branson didn't mention anything, and I certainly didn't see anyone carrying a lit candle." "Thank you," Price said. "Please send Branson to me when he's free." Branson arrived soon after, looking slightly nervous but composed. "Branson, do you recall lighting any candles in the gallery recently?" Branson shook his head. "No, sir. The candles are decorative. We've no reason to light them." "And during the ball?" "I was busy attending to the guests, sir. I didn't even step into the gallery that night." Price studied him carefully. "Then someone else lit a candle from one of the candelabras. Do you have any idea who it might have been?" Branson's face betrayed genuine surprise. "I can't imagine, sir. Most of the guests wouldn't even notice the candles, let alone use them." "Very well," Price said, dismissing him. Price turned his attention back to the suspects. Lady Eleanor, Mr. Raines, and Clara Templeton had all been evasive in their earlier interviews. Now, with the wax as a lead, he decided to confront them again. He began with Lady Eleanor, finding her in the drawing room embroidering a piece of fine linen. "Inspector," she said coolly, setting her work aside. "More questions?" "Indeed," Price replied, taking a seat opposite her. "What can you tell me about the candles in the gallery?" Her brow furrowed. "The red ones? They're purely ornamental. Why do you ask?" "One of them was lit during the ball," Price said. Did you notice anyone carrying a candle that evening? Eleanor shook her head. No, but then I was preoccupied with other matters. Such as? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Family matters, Inspector. Nothing relevant to your investigation. On the contrary, Price said, his tone firm, everything is relevant in a case like this. Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing further. Next, Price sought out Mr. Rains, who was in the billiard room practicing his aim. Inspector, Rains greeted him with feigned cheerfulness. What can I do for you? Tell me, Mr. Rains, Price said, did you happen to see anyone carrying a red candle during the ball? Rains straightened, his expression darkening. A red candle? No, I can't say I did. Why? Because one was used in the gallery that evening, Price said, watching him closely. And I find it curious that no one seems to know who lit it. Rains set his cue down, his face tightening. Are you suggesting I had something to do with it? I'm suggesting you're avoiding the question, Price replied. If you have nothing to hide, Mr. Rains, then you have nothing to fear. Rains gave a short, humorless laugh. I didn't light any candles, Inspector. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd prefer to finish my game. Finally, Price questioned Clara Templeton. She was in the servants' quarters, folding linens as usual. Clara, Price began, what do you know about the red candles in the gallery? Clara's hand stilled. Nothing, sir. I've seen them, but they're just for show, aren't they? One was lit during the ball, Price said, and given your earlier admission of being near the conservatory, I wonder if you saw anyone using it. Clara's face turned pale. I didn't, sir. I swear it. Then why do you look so frightened? I'm not frightened, she said quickly, though her trembling hands betrayed her. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Price leaned closer, his voice low but firm. The only wrong thing, Clara, is withholding the truth. If you know anything about the candle, or the theft, you must tell me now. Clara hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. I saw someone near the gallery that night. I didn't think much of it then. But now... Who did you see? Lady Eleanor, Clara whispered. Price's eyes narrowed. As the evening drew to a close, the inspector stood in the gallery once more, gazing at the empty frame. The thief's actions were methodical, deliberate, but they had left traces behind, and with each clue, the noose was tightening. Chapter 6. A Web of Deceit. Inspector Price paced the grand drawing room, piecing together the fragments of evidence in his mind. Each clue, a candle trail, a cryptic note, vague alibis, seemed to hover tantalizingly close to a breakthrough. But one thing was clear. Lady Eleanor's name was cropping up far too frequently to ignore. A conversation with Lady Eleanor. Price decided to confront Lady Eleanor directly. He found her seated by the fire in the library, a cup of tea balanced delicately in her hand. She looked up as he approached, her gaze steady, but her posture tense. Inspector, she greeted him coolly, what brings you here this morning? I have more questions, Lady Eleanor, Price said, sitting across from her. You were seen near the gallery on the night of the ball, and I'd like to know why. Eleanor's expression didn't waver, but a flicker of something, perhaps unease, passed through her eyes. I was merely passing through on my way to the conservatory. The ball was overwhelming, and I needed a moment of quiet. Is that why Clara Templeton also saw you near the conservatory earlier that evening? Her fingers tightened on her teacup. Clara is mistaken. I wasn't near the conservatory before dinner. If she claims otherwise, she's either lying or confused. Price leaned forward. Lady Eleanor, the more you deny, the more suspicious your movements appear. You were seen near both the gallery and the conservatory, two key locations connected to the theft of the Christmas masterpiece. If you want me to believe in your innocence, now is the time to provide an explanation. Eleanor placed her teacup on the table and exhaled sharply. Very well, Inspector. If you must know, I was looking for someone that evening, someone who wasn't where they were supposed to be. And who might that be? My brother Charles, she admitted reluctantly. Mr. Rains? Price asked, surprised. What made you search for him near the conservatory? Because he'd been behaving oddly all evening, Eleanor said, her tone clipped. He was agitated, restless, and I thought he might have slipped away to avoid the guests. I didn't find him, though. Price absorbed her words. And did you eventually locate him? Yes, she replied, her voice lowering. In the garden, arguing with someone. Who? I couldn't see clearly, she said, looking away. But I'm certain it was one of the staff. A visit to Charles Rains. Inspector Price sought out Charles Rains, who was in the smoking room with a glass of brandy in hand, despite the early hour. Inspector, Rains said with a sardonic smile, back for another round of interrogations? Mr. Rains, your sister has provided me with some interesting information, Price said, sitting opposite him. She claims you were behaving unusually on the night of the ball. Care to explain? Rains chuckled, though it lacked warmth. Eleanor is always dramatizing things. I was merely stressed about the ball and its importance to the family. And your argument in the garden? Rains's smile faltered. What argument? Your sister says she saw you arguing with a member of the staff near the garden, Price said, his voice firm. Who were you speaking to and why? And Rains downed the remainder of his brandy and set the glass aside. If you must know, I was speaking to Branson. He'd botched some of the arrangements for the evening, and I was frustrated. Yet you chose to handle this in private during the ball. It wasn't a matter for public ears, Rains said dismissively. Did this argument involve the painting? Price pressed. Rains's eyes narrowed. Of course not. Are you accusing me of something, Inspector? I'm asking questions, Mr. Rains, Price replied. The answers, or lack thereof, will determine where this investigation leads. Clara's confession. Determined to follow every lead, Price called Clara Templeton to his temporary office. The young maid entered hesitantly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. You asked to see me, sir? Yes, Clara, Price said. I need you to be completely honest with me. Lady Eleanor claims she was searching for Mr. Rains on the night of the ball. Did you notice anything unusual about his behaviour? Clara hesitated, her eyes darting toward the floor. Clara, Price said gently, if you know something, now is the time to speak. Holding back will only make things worse. Finally, Clara looked up, her voice trembling. I did see Mr. Rains that night, sir. He was near the gallery with Lady Eleanor. Price's eyebrows shot up. You're certain of this? Yes, sir. They were whispering about something, but I couldn't hear what. They looked tense. And when was this? Just before the guests started dancing, Clara said. The red wax connection. That evening, Price returned to the gallery with Branson. Branson, Price began, when did you last replace the candles in these candelabras? About a week before the ball, sir, Branson said. It's part of my routine to ensure everything is in place before any major event. And do you recall anything unusual about them? Branson frowned. Not particularly, sir. But now that you mention it, one of the candles seemed shorter than the others when I replaced it. Shorter? Price repeated. Yes, sir, almost as if it had been used before, Branson said. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Price nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Branson. That will be all for now. As Branson left, Price's gaze lingered on the candelabra. The shorter candle, the argument in the garden, and the mysterious note, all of it was beginning to form a picture. But was it the right one? The web tightens. By the end of the day, Price had more questions than answers. Lady Eleanor's evasiveness, Charles Rains's agitation, and Clara's nervous observations all pointed to hidden motives and secrets. Sitting at his desk, Price sketched out the timeline of events once more, determined to identify the missing piece. Somewhere within the estate, the truth was waiting to be uncovered, and Price was certain that when he found it, it would be far more shocking than anyone had anticipated. Chapter 7. The Masterpiece Unmasked. The snow continued to fall steadily. outside Winterley Manor as Inspector Price prepared for the most critical phase of his investigation. The mounting clues, wax trails, secretive movements, cryptic arguments, had formed a tangled web, but Price was finally beginning to unravel it. Now, it was time to confront the suspects with his discoveries. A summons to the gallery. Price had Lord Winterley gather Lady Eleanor, Charles Rains and Clara Templeton in the gallery. The room was colder than usual, the absence of the Christmas masterpiece a glaring void on the wall. As the suspects filed in, their expressions ranged from wary to indignant. "Inspector," Lady Eleanor said sharply, "is this truly necessary? We've answered your questions countless times." "Indeed, Lady Eleanor," Price replied, "but I believe the time has come to lay the truth bare." He gestured for them to sit. "You are all here because you have connections, some subtle, others glaring, to the events of the ball, and each of you has withheld critical pieces of information." Charles Rains scoffed. "If you have something to say, Inspector, say it. This melodrama is unnecessary." Price ignored the remark, his eyes scanning each of their faces. The theft of the Christmas masterpiece was not a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was meticulously planned and executed by someone who had intimate knowledge of this household. Price began with the wax. The first clue that pointed to the thief's movements was the red wax trail leading from the gallery to the corridor. Only one candle in the candelabra had been recently lit, and its shortened length suggested it had been used before. He turned to Branson, who stood quietly by the door. "You confirmed this, did you not?" Branson nodded. "Yes, sir. One of the candles was noticeably shorter when I replaced it." "Exactly," Price continued. "The candle was lit not for illumination, but for a purpose far more devious." Price paced the room, his voice sharp. This wax trail indicated that the thief had not only planned their route, but had used the candle as a signal, likely to an accomplice. Lady Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "A signal? And to whom, pray tell?" Price's gaze landed squarely on Charles Rains. "Mr. Rains," Price began, "you were seen arguing with Branson in the garden on the night of the ball. What was the nature of this argument?" Rains stiffened. "As I told you, it was about the arrangements for the evening. Nothing more." "And yet," Price pressed, "your sister also saw you near the conservatory, in what she described as a tense discussion. You claim to have been stressed about the ball, but I find that explanation insufficient." Rains's face flushed. "Are you accusing me of something, Inspector?" "I am," Price said bluntly. "You and Branson were discussing more than arrangements. You were coordinating the theft." Gasps filled the room. Branson stepped forward, his face pale. "That's not true, sir. I would never—" "Calm yourself, Branson," Price interrupted. "I do not believe you were an accomplice, but you were unwittingly involved. Mr. Rains used your frustration as a cover for his own actions." "Lady Eleanor's secret." Price turned to Lady Eleanor. "As for you, my lady, your evasiveness has only served to deepen my suspicions. You claim to have been searching for your brother, yet you failed to mention the note found in your possession." Eleanor's composure faltered. "What note?" "The one instructing you to meet someone near the conservatory," Price said. "A note that suggests you knew more about the events of that evening than you've admitted." Eleanor's lips trembled. "I didn't know it was about the painting. I thought—" She trailed off, visibly distressed. "What did you think?" Price demanded. "I thought Charles was planning to leave," she said quietly. "He's spoken before of wanting to escape the family's obligations. I assume the note was his way of saying goodbye." Price nodded. "And that assumption led you to confront him, didn't it? Near the gallery, no less." Eleanor nodded reluctantly. Clara, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I saw them, sir. Lady Eleanor and Mr. Rains. They were arguing near the gallery, and then he left toward the conservatory." "Thank you, Clara," Price said kindly. "Your honesty is commendable." He turned back to the siblings. "This brings us to the crux of the matter. Mr. Rains, you orchestrated the theft, didn't you?" I did no such thing, Rain snapped, but his bluster was weakening. Your actions suggest otherwise, Price said firmly. The red wax trail, the argument with Branson, the note to your sister, it all points to you, and yet... Price's voice softened, a calculated pause. You didn't act alone. The room fell silent as Price let the weight of his words settle. You needed someone who had access to the gallery and could move unnoticed among the guests, Price continued. Someone who could unlock the case housing the painting. That person was Clara Templeton. Clara's eyes widened in horror. No, sir, I didn't. Clara, Price interrupted gently. Your role may have been minor, but you were complicit. Mr. Raines likely coerced you, didn't he? Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she nodded. He said if I didn't help, I'd lose my position here. He promised it would only be a distraction, that no one would be hurt. And so you followed his instructions, Price said. You lit the candle and left the gallery door unlocked, allowing him to slip in unnoticed. He used the cover of the dancing to remove the painting and pass it to an accomplice outside. The masterpiece recovered. Price's final reveal stunned the room. But Mr. Raines made one fatal error. He underestimated the security measures. The painting was recovered by Scotland Yard before it could leave the country. Lord Winterly, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, stood abruptly. You have the painting? Price nodded. It is safely in custody, awaiting its return. Justice will now take its course. As Charles Raines was taken into custody, his face was a mask of anger and regret. Lady Eleanor sat silently, her hands trembling. Clara Templeton, though complicit, was spared arrest due to her coerced involvement and valuable testimony. A final reflection. That evening, as the snow blanketed Winterly Manor, Price stood alone in the gallery, gazing at the empty frame. The Christmas masterpiece would soon return, its theft a mere footnote in its storied history. Price allowed himself a small smile. The case had been intricate, the motives tangled, but once again justice had prevailed. Sometimes, he murmured to himself, even the most elaborate plots unravel with a single drop of wax.